Okay, so I'm looking at my storyboard for a grocery list app. And how this grocery list app is going to work is really simple. We've already done some of this. I just took the stuff I gave you the other day, which was the local storage stuff, where you can type in what you want for groceries, hit save, and it appends it to a array, and then immediately saves that array into local storage. And then I have a button that's called View List, and that View List has a segue on it that goes to this table view, and this is just the grocery list itself, and it's going to populate this table view just like it did the Pokemon. Only instead of with Pokemon, it's going to populate it with what has been saved in the local storage. And then the whole thing is wrapped inside of a navigation controller right here. And again, how I did that is I selected this view controller and hit Editor, Embed in, Navigation Controller. And what that does is make it so that it has the bar across the top. Okay? Additionally, I don't think we've actually talked about this, but additionally you can see in the navigation controller I have titles for these things. So it's going to say add item and grocery list. And how I do that is if you search down here in your library for navigation, you have navigation item. And you can just drag these into the navigation controller at the top and put in, and they can take on a variety of forms. And so that's just a way to make a label. So let's look at this thing in action, and then I'll walk you through the Swift code. This I'm going to fly through because it should be review from Tuesday, mostly. Okay? And then we'll get into the more complicated stuff, which is how to do custom table stuff. Let's kill some stuff to make some room. So, what would you get at the grocery store? We'll say eggs. When I hit view list, you can see this is all the stuff that I had gotten at the grocery store. Okay? Yeah.
How do you delete stuff from the grocery?
How do you remove stuff?
Yeah.
We're going to get to that. Okay? But this at high level makes sense? Cool. Okay. So let's go into our Swift code. This is just two view controllers. So I have two view controllers. Here's the first one. This is just the text field stuff. This is nothing new. In fact, I'm pretty sure this is exactly the same thing that we looked at on Tuesday. It's just, you know, when a view loads, load the grocery list. If it's there, if it's not, don't do anything. And then every time someone types in a new thing, first replace the text field with nothing so they can quickly type another thing in and not have to delete EGGS for eggs. It just wipes that out right here. And then it saves what they had, or it appends what they had typed. It appends what they had typed to the saved grocery list that I have off the shelf, and then it puts it back on the shelf down here. Okay? Nothing new. Then, in my second view controller, which is the one that holds the list itself, I have this, which is, first I have a table view, and that's all the same thing as the table view stuff that we talked about before. And then right underneath it, I have a saved grocery list variable that I populate with what had been saved previously out of the user defaults. So because I'm saving the user defaults, I don't need to do any of that segue, destination, tunneling stuff that we had talked about before because it's all going onto the shelf. And so one view puts it on the shelf, and the next view takes it off the shelf. Okay? Make sense? All right. And then just standard stuff where down here, it just tells it how many rows, how many cells to make based on how long the array is. And then down here, let me make this bigger so it's easier to see. And then down here, it creates a new cell out of a prototype called task cell and goes into it, changes the text label to this, and looks up in the array, whatever index row we're in, and returns the cell. Make sense how this works? Okay? And that's it. So the next logical question is, okay, the goal of a grocery list is not to capture what you need to get at the grocery store. The goal of the grocery list is capture what you need at the grocery store and check it off once you have it, right? Because otherwise you're going to have an infinitely long list. And so how do we do that? And so we'll hit that in a second, because what I'm going to show you is an app we're going to build using code that you already have. Please hold. So using our Pokemon list that we made the other day, we're going to build this. And it's ugly, but when you see it, you'll be like, oh, I can see how that could become this other stuff that's super useful. So here we have our list of Pokemon. And it goes to the thing that it tells you that more about that Pokemon. Imagine that were to say, it's electric type, and it's found in the Oklahoma region, or whatever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? And then it goes back to the list. Okay? Same thing here. When I click on this, I could make it like, okay, I got this thing, check. And then you go and remove it from the array. Or you pull the array out, you remove that item from the array, and then put the array back. And then when you go back, it redraws the list without that thing inside of it. Because these worlds no longer exist once you move off of each one. Make sense? Okay. So there's a couple of things you'll see that I've done here that's different than what we've talked about. The first is my cells are taller. So this is how you can do things like make an Instagram clone where there's gigantic cells in the table. I have images. I have text, which you already know how to do text from the default settings for tables. But if we were to make our own, we got to put text in. And then also has this little chevron on the side as an indicator that this is a navigatable table to the user. It says, hey, if you tap on this, it goes someplace. And then the last thing is, it actually goes someplace when you tap on one of them. Okay? Pretty clear where we're driving the bus? Okay. So let's look at taking our initial Pokemon app that we had and building to that. So here's the initial Pokemon app that we had. It's in Canvas right now. And again, it's nothing new. So this is just it. And it uses a default table right here. What I'm going to do is create my own table cell. And there's a couple little gotchas inside of it. So just like this is a view, this whole thing is a view controller. And the view controller holds a table view, and the table view holds a cell. And just like before, I had image views that hold images, that those are two different things. A cell, I'm going to make a prototype cell, my own prototype cell that goes inside a table view, but I got to like wire all of it up. And it's just like everything else. It's like nested dolls, where it's like you got to put this inside of that, and this inside of that, and you do whatever you want. So the first thing we're going to do here is kill our prototypes, our default cell, and make a fresh one. And so to do that, I'm going to go down here and get myself a cell, a table view cell. And I put the table view cell inside of the table. And I'm going to get rid of this old one. And so now this is my data view. This is my brand new table view cell. Now this is the storyboard version, and so I can do all kinds of stuff with this table view cell. So for specifically, I can do stuff like I'll make each individual cell bigger. Which I can never remember where they put that. Here we go. So if I select the Pokemon table row, I can increase the row height to whatever I want. So let's say I want this thing to be 150 units tall. And then I want to have some text. So that's a label. and I put that in there. And you can see it's drawing a little orange border around saying like this is going inside of that. So specifically over here you can see it went inside of my new table view cell. And I can put an image in there. Shoot, I deleted all my little Pokemon images, but we'll get those later. Okay, so I have all this basic stuff wired up. Now I need to kind of prepare this for launch. And so to do that, because you need to think of this cell just like you think of a view controller, where there's a version of it that appears in the storyboard, but I also need the Swift code side of it. And so to do that, I need to make a new Swift code file. So I'm going to go up here to New File, and we're going to do something we haven't done before. So up until this point, we've been making generic Swift files, and we've been copy and pasting view controller code from one to the other and all that kind of stuff. That's convenient when you already have something on the stage, or when you already have something that exists. But if you're making something that you don't have one of yet, that can be a real pain. And you can manually recreate the new stuff by finding code on the internet or whatever. But your life is easier if you select Cocoa Touch class. Inside of Cocoa Touch class is every existing class of object that's supported inside of Xcode for the type of device you're creating. So everything that's supported on the iPhone out of the box. And as new versions of iOS roll out and then the associated new version of Xcode roll out, there'll be new stuff inside of that. The important thing is you got to make sure that it says iOS here if you're making iPhone apps. And then you hit next. And the other important thing is here that you make sure Swift is selected down here. And it's just based, you can see subclass of. It's just saying what kind of thing do you want to make? And you can scroll through here until you see UI table view cell. That's what I want to make, is a table view cell. And I should probably give this a more descriptive name than just the default one, so I'll call it Pokemon table view cell. And it says, where does it want to go? I'm going to put it into this current project that I'm working on. And now I have a table view cell. And so, just like in a view controller, I will control drag out of the storyboard into the view controller Swift code. From this, I will control drag out of the cell in the storyboard into this file to link these things up. Okay? So what I need to do is first in my storyboard tell it that, hey, this is not just any ordinary cell. This is a Pokemon table view cell. And so I need to wire all that up. And I often forget where I do that from. Hold on a second. Please hold. Here we go. So this little guy here looks like a little newspaper. Make sure you have the table view cell selected over here. And that will enable you to, when you hit class, you can select your new Pokemon table view cell that you've created. And say, okay, it's one of those. And then also, over here, if I go to the little slider graphic, you'll see identifier. You'll recall from before I said the most important thing about setting up a table is you got to give it an identifier as a note to grab. So we're going to give this a reuse identifier that this prototype is referenced. Now, it's easy to think that all these things are the same, but they're not. Because let's say you were to make an application that had 50 different tables on it, but they all use the exact same custom cell, then this would be different for each of the 50 screens. Does that make sense? So reuse identifier is different than the class of what this is. For my purposes, just because this is a simple, crap, somebody got a pluggy thingy? Thank you. This is what happens when you let your kid play Minecraft. I've done that before. Thank you. Remember that I stole this from you, because I will forget.
Okay.
Okay. Are y'all with me so far? Okay. So an identifier, I'm just going to give this the name Pokemon cell. You can give it whatever you want. But I just got to remember that's what I'm calling it when I run my table. So to test it, I'm not going to actually customize, I'm not going to populate any of this content. I'm just going to test to make sure that it shows however many Pokemon I have in that array, it shows that many of these generic looking cells to make sure that that works. So I'm just going to go back over to my view controller and make sure that when it's asking what's the identifier, I make sure that it says Pokemon cell, that's right. And I'm going to comment out this line where it populates the text because that hasn't been wired up yet. So that'll count, that'll throw in an error. You can see it even showed, it started to show an error too before I commented it. And then I'm going to run it. And nothing's wired up yet, but it should at least show me 5 generic cells. I think 5. Is that how many? Yeah. Just 5 generic cells. Okay? So I know I'm in the right direction. I just got to go ahead and populate that stuff. So to do that, that's interesting that the simulator doesn't show the charging icon. Oh. Anyway, okay. So now we got to make our friend the cell here, this label and the image, be wired up to their Swift code so that I can modify them. And so to do that, I do the same thing I always do when I wire these things up. And I select this, and I just got to make sure I have the right thing. Go in here and say, okay, I want the label to be something I can control. So I'm holding down control right now. And just the fact that see how it's giving me that blue line on the right-hand side? That alone tells me I've got something set up right. Because if these two things weren't connected, it wouldn't allow this connection to occur. And that's a label, so I'm just going to call that like Pokemon title or Pokemon name. And I'm going to wire up the image view too. I see you. Give me a second. I'm going to call that Pokemon photo. Whoops, that's not where I want it. So I'm just going to put it up here. Yeah. Yep, that means it's not wired up right. So no problem. So it doesn't let you do it. Just make sure if you're running into problems, A, make sure the cell has been linked up as the class of Pokemon tableview cell. And then also look over here in your hierarchy. If you just drag random stuff into the storyboard, it's not going to work. You got to make sure that random stuff is tucked into the content view of the cell. Okay? All right, so now I can reference this label in any time that I call this cell with Pokemon name. And I can reference this image view anytime that I call this cell with Pokemon photo. Now, I am someone who can never remember crap, right? Like, literally at home, we have 3 kids, 2 dogs, 1 wife, all right? I will cycle through everyone's name until I find the right person because my memory is garbage. You know, some kid, like, left his Legos on the floor and I stepped on it. I'm like, ah, and I yell the dog's name and my wife, you know, like I'm horrible. So you might not need to do this, but I do, which is in about 4 seconds, I know I'm going to forget that's what I named these 2 things. And so that's where the Venn diagram thing comes in handy. Up until this point, we've only had storyboard on one side and Swift code on the other side, but I can just as easily have 2 different Swift codes open at the same time. And so that's what I'm going to do. I just need to remember on the left I have the table itself, and on the right I have the cell. And I'm going to kind of tuck my cell away because it's a little bit less important. And so now that these are all hooked up, you can see down here before I was using the default cell thing, but now I could just say cell, not text label, that doesn't exist, it's called Pokemon name. change it to the array's index path row. What don't you like? Yes, you do. Do not lie to me. Yes, you do. I mean, is everyone else in the same error?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Hold on a second. Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Forgot a key thing. Okay. We're just going to look at the one on the left really quick because we got to do one last little thing, which is, okay, this is frankly something that I think is dumb and probably will be changed in the future because it doesn't make a lot of sense, which is I've created a cell right here and I've said, okay, go to the table, get the reusable cell that has the identifier of Pokemon cell, okay? And then in the storyboard, I said that the Pokemon cell is this class. Remember how I did all that? Okay? This is the annoying thing. Swift doesn't know that I said that is a Pokemon cell, a Pokemon table view cell. It doesn't remember. It doesn't know that that's the class that I had selected over in the storyboard. I'm sure that there's some good reason why that connection is not automatically made for me, but I don't know what that good reason is. So I gotta explicitly tell the Swift side of the world that that is not just that particular cell that I want, but it also has the class that I also want. Don't worry if you don't remember that. Just remember you can copy and paste from other code. And so what I'm saying here is, hold on, this is the name I gave it last time, but that's not what I'm using now. What this is saying, hey, I want to create a cell. It's based on the Pokemon table, the reusable cell that has the identifier Pokemon cell, and I want to treat it as a Pokemon table view cell, which is the same name I gave it over here. I know that's annoying, but does that make sense, what I'm doing? Just remember, copy paste, okay? And so now, this is bueno. Although, I want to keep that as an optional. Okay. So now, it works, and if I run it, the images don't load, because I haven't done that part yet. But the text does. And so you can see it says Pikachu, Charmander, Squirtle, and that's just because these are two. I haven't made my text fields large enough to hold them. Yeah.
I'm getting an error on the top. Class. It's saying that
Make sense? Everybody cool? Okay. Now to do the images, you don't need me to show you how to do the images because it's exactly the same way you did the images before. Okay? But what I did is I just went over to the Google and I found myself a bunch of Pokemon images. And here they are. And I'm just going to copy those into my assets folder. I'll give you this. Oh, I can't bring that with me. How do I take that out? Are you going to make, do I have to manually do that? Ugh, that's the worst. Okay. Well, we'll worry about the images later. Okay? What I wanted to do was one thing I wanted to point out, okay? Which is in my array, I have Pikachu, but you can see Pikachu is lowercase, okay? And Charmander and Squirtle, which I think I misspelled Squirtle. But then in my images, when I set up my images, I wasn't smart. And I named my images with capitals. Articuno, Ash, Charmander, Pikachu, Squirtle. Okay? And so I could manually go into that array and make it all be proper cased for that to work. And then when I display it, you can see that as well, the display is lowercase. And that doesn't look very cool. What I want to do is uppercase it. I can manually go in and change the array to do that, or I can do some string modification to have the computer automatically capitalize that for me. And so I just want to really quickly show you this as a thing because it's useful. And that is dot capitalized. There's also dot uppercase, dot lowercase. And so what this is going to do is, what I'm going to do is change it so it doesn't just show the Pokemon's name exactly as it's written in that array. It's going to take that and convert it to a capitalized version of that string. Do a little bit of string modification, okay? This is just one of those things that's nice. You don't have to make a capitalized version of the Pokemon's name. You don't have to make an uppercase version of it. This is also useful. I've never done this, but this string modification stuff is also really useful for localization. So if you wanted to like make the German version of the app or whatever, you can use the same string modification type of thing to do that sort of deal. And there's more than just uppercase, lowercase, and capitalized. There's also, in other languages, there's different rules around capitalization, and it has all of those built in too. Okay, so now I have my app. But what I really want is, well, first let's fix this because that's annoying to me. What I really want is to go to a second view controller to show detail about the Pokemon that you had clicked on. And so I'm going to go ahead and build that. That's just another view controller. And I want to make it so that you can go deep and then come back out. And so to do that, I'm just going to select my first view controller and embed it in a navigation controller. And so now all that back business will automatically happen. And I'll put a little label on this one that says, this is the Pokedex. Okay, so now how do I go to this page? I don't, because when you think of this is one of those like, how does that work? The normal buttons that we've used before are all buttons, and they just always go to the same place, okay? And there's just one of them. This is, there could be an infinite number of cells. How do I say this cell goes to this page? The good news is that in our case, every time I use this cell, it's always going to go to this page, to the detailed Pokemon view. Okay? So to set that up, I don't select the table and segue from the table because, in theory, you could have more than one prototype cell. And each prototype cell could go to a different one of these pages. I can't think of a single app that uses that type of functionality where sometimes tapping on one cell goes to a detailed view and sometimes tapping on a cell goes to something else and that kind of thing. But it is possible. And so what I'm actually going to do is link the cell itself from this to this. And what's nice about that is I don't need to make a button inside of the cell because it's better for the user. It's a larger touch target. They're going to hit the entire cell. And so by tapping on the cell itself, it triggers a segue. So to make sure I have the right thing, just make sure that you have the Pokemon cell selected over here. And then you just control drag off of this onto this view controller. And that's saying anytime a user touches this cell, it's going to go to the detailed view. And you know you got it right because the navigation controller attaches itself to this as you go deeper. And on this secondary page, I'm going to put just something like, I'll put the Pokemon's name again up here if I wanted to. Okay, now last thing, aesthetics, because I'm a designer, I care about aesthetics, I care about signals. How do I make sure a user knows this is a tapables table versus another type of table? And in iOS, the convention is a little chevron on the right-hand side, is a little symbol that says this thing goes to here, goes deeper. And so if you select the cell, you can see this little thing called accessory. An accessory gives you default little dealios. And what's nice about using the default dealios is that if Apple decides, oh, in iOS 11, it's not a little arrow sign, it's a little finger pointing something or something like that. If they change their aesthetic, all you need to do is open up this project, recompile, and resubmit, and it fixes it because you're using the defaults. So I'm going to use the default disclosure indicator, which is that, and it just magically appears. There's other ones like a little eye and a circle and all that kind of stuff, which should trigger different types of interaction. But this one triggers a standard. I'm going deeper into the table. Okay. So let's test that. So now I have my list and I can scroll through it. And then when I tap on one of them, it goes into the detail view. And because it's in a navigation controller, I can back out. Now how do I make it so label says the right thing? That is just exactly the same thing we've done before, which is by tunneling some data through a segue. And the only new thing that we need to know is that we just need to know which thing they tapped on, okay? And you would think that the way that you find that out is by some magic thing around the button, but no, this is actually weird. The best way I think to think about this is, remember how you had segmented controls that were like dog, cat, fish? There were little pill buttons at the top, okay? And to be able to know which one was selected, it was called like segment index or something like that, right? In my mind, it's best to think of a table as a vertical one of those, of a segment index that's been rotated 90 degrees. And so when people tap on cells, don't think of it as that's a button. Think of it as they're selecting one of the segments. And so really what we're going to do is not read out what button they tap on or something like that. Instead what we're going to do is read out which cell did they select out of the table. So the table is going to tell us that information. And then we're going to take that and pass it through a tunnel using segues to the next view controller. Okay? Make sense? And so on my next view controller, I'll get your question. On my next view controller, I'm just going to, and it passes just like a segment passes 0, 1, 2, 3, or whatever. This is going to pass 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, down. And so I'm just going to pass the index across. Did that answer your question? Great. So to do that, I'm going to steal some code from myself and walk you through it. So the first thing I'm going to do is name my segue. So select the segue, give it a unique identifier. I'm going to call it go to Pokemon, what did I call it? I think I would, again, see footnote on horrible memory. Individual Pokemon is what I called it before. And then in my view controller, I'm just going to, after the table view has all been constructed and everything, I'm going to add the same prepare for stuff. It's giving me an alert because this doesn't exist yet, but it's the same stuff that you're used to seeing. I'll comment this out so that that isn't there. Actually, that will cause another error, but that's okay. So what this is going to do is say, okay, when there's a segue, if it's go to individual Pokemon, Set the destination to individual Pokemon view controller, which we haven't created yet, but that's going to be the view controller Swift code. It's associated with the view controller on my storyboard. And then it's going to set a variable inside of that I haven't written yet, and that variable is going to be called Pokemon index. And this is the magic. That's right there is your magic, which is I'm passing in, I'm going into the Pokemon table, which I think is what I called that, right? Yeah. I'm going into the Pokemon table, and what is the index path for selected row, which is easily one of the longest attributes I've ever seen used, but it is super descriptive. It is the index path, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for, what is it for? The selected row, the row that they just tapped on. And it gets out the row. So it gets out 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because there's other attributes that are part of the object index path for selected row. Yeah.
So does that just pass the index of the thing you tapped on, or does it pass all the information?
Just the index.
And how does that work? Because how does the new table view, or how does the new view controller have access to that information if you're just passing?
It doesn't. The only thing it's going to know is you tapped on the 0th thing, or the first thing. The good news is I can just create an array on the other side. It's a mirror of the first one's array. We haven't talked about global stuff yet, where you could have global things across all these things. But for our purposes, to make things easier, I can make a little array that says Pikachu, Charmander, blah, 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 blah. And on the next one, I just make another one that says Pikachu, Charmander, blah, 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 blah. And then another array that says, that is like Pokemon description. And it would say something like the yellow Pokemon, comma, the fiery Pokemon, comma, blah, 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 blah. And as long as those are all the same index, then it all makes sense. Cool. You're asking exactly the right question. Okay, so the last thing I need to do to be able to do all this is the same thing we've done before, which is make a new view controller, Swift code, and make sure that it's named properly so that this doesn't throw an error, and make sure that I have this Pokemon index as a variable inside of it to get populated. So, last time we had made a new view controller, we just copied and pasted all this crap. But this time we're going to use the slightly easier way of doing that now that we know what we're doing, which is file, new, file, not generic Swift class, but a Cocoa Touch class. And I want to make a view controller. And I'm going to call it individual Pokemon view controller, which I think is the wrong name, but that's okay. I can change it later. And hit OK, and it adds it. And then in my storyboard, I need to say, just like before, this view controller here that we made, that's that new one that we just made. That's the individual Pokemon view controller. And in my first page, right here, which is the view controller, I need to put in the right name for that, individual Pokemon view. Oh, good, I remembered it right. Okay. And so now the red stop sign is no longer on this line because this exists. Now the red stop sign is on. There's no such thing as Pokemon index in that new view controller. So let's go into that new view controller, individual Pokemon view controller, and create a variable that we're going to call Pokemon index. And we'll just set a default value to 0. So it knows it's an int. And then I just need to wire it up so that I can control this label, just like we've done already probably 15 times. And so to do that, I just make sure that my Swift code that I have open is the individual view controller. And just take this label, control drag over, and I'll call that like the Pokemon's name. And then I'll view did load. Oh wait, one more thing. I'm going to repurpose this array so that in my Pokemon view controller, I have the array that it mirrors the first one. This is the wrong file. Hold on. So this is my new Pokemon individual Pokemon view controller. Has that array. It has the label wired up, and it's going to receive Pokemon index. And so that just means when it's ready to draw the page, all I need to do is say change Pokemon names text to Pokemon index. And we're good to go. So I tap on Pikachu, and it says Pikachu. I tap on Charmander, and it says Charmander. Now how do I make it so, okay, that's kind of a useless app. You tap on a thing, and then you go to another page that tells you the exact same thing that you just tapped on. How do I do something with that? Let's just make it say some detail about that Pokemon. So I could make another array that's like Pokemon details. And as long as the first one of these is matched to Pikachu, I'm good to go. And as long as the second one is matched to Charmander, I'm good to go. Okay? And so then, down here, as long as in my storyboard I have a place to put all that stuff, I'll put another label in. It's like a detail view. And I would, if I was doing this for real, I would style it and make it so it can be multiple lines and blah, 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 blah. But for our purposes, we're just going to wire it up like this. Oh, shoot. I named the same thing as the variable. Let me call this array. Cool? Makes sense? And this array that has details, using the exact same technique, I could have an array of images, or I could array of all kinds of information. And this is exactly how your phone works when you display an address book. It just has a list of all the people, and then when you tap on one of them, it goes and it has another detail of all those people. Now, the way we're doing it in kind of a janky way by creating these arrays that hold all of the information on multiple pages. We'll talk about how to make that work better in the future, but this is an easy way of getting there. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
So two things. So first, does sending like an array of objects work the same way as this? So if I just have like a Pokemon object with like the name and how big it is and all that stuff down the line, is it the exact same as this?
Yeah.
Okay.
You just, what you would do is have an array, someplace you have an array of objects.
Okay.
And those objects would have the name of the Pokemon, the description.
And then I can just segue it over and I have to worry about it.
Yeah.
And then could you go to your code for the first view controller?
Sure. We'll
So
put both of them up at the
I
same
didn't get
time.
the destination part at the bottom.
Okay. It's the same deal as all the other stuff like that. So on the right, this is the individual Pokemon view controller that hauls all that. Just shows the very simple view. And this is the one that's preparing for segue to it. Now, if I were to modify my grocery application, I would make it so that on page 0, you add items to your grocery list. On page 1, it shows you a table of all the grocery items. And on page 2, when you tap on one of those, it goes to this, just like this goes to here. And on that second page, you could put in like, how much did it cost? And did you finish it? And if you did, then you hit check. And when you check, it removes it out of local storage and goes back and redraws the other table. Is everybody clear about how this works, how my little pokedex works here? Okay, cool. Here is your assignment in Swift over the weekend, and then we'll get into the launching project one. Your assignment in Swift over the weekend is to finish whatever it is that I forgot to post last time, okay? And if you've done that, great, you're in a better spot than everybody else. If you haven't, well, it's your lucky day that I forgot. So, and then the second thing is, I've showed you how I've taken Pokemon and made like a little Pokedex. What I want you to do is choose some other pop culture thing. It could be bands or characters from Stranger Things or whatever, okay? And do the same deal, where you have a list of things with text, and I'm going to add some additional levels of complexity. So with text, but also put an image in there and have the image swap out on the table, and maybe some little bit of detail about that, okay? So if it's bands that, or albums that Megadeth released, you could have a little album art cover. I don't know where I went with that. Little album art cover, and then a title of an album, and underneath that, like the release year. Okay? And then you tap on that, and it segues to a detailed view of that thing. So if you were to do that, maybe it shows a bigger picture of the album art and a list of songs that is inside of that album. Okay? Or if you were to do Stranger Things characters, you have all the little kids, and then you tap on one and it shows you some detail about that kid. Okay? But the big idea is that I want to see you making a table view that's more complex than just text. It has things like images and multiple text fields. And it goes to a detailed view that is the same deal, has multiple things besides just what I've done. You can probably pull that off in class today. Like, it is not rocket surgery. Okay, but you're going to have to do a little bit more legwork, like go and get all the image assets and all that kind of stuff. Okay, does that make sense? Anybody feel like they would be stuck to be able to run with that? If I give you what I have here. No? Okay. Just so we didn't get there, but if I were to change that Pokemon image, because I'm too lazy to do that right now in class, and you don't want to see me Google every single Pokemon. How we do that is just right here, which is the exact same image views and populating with images and all that kind of stuff that you've done. Only in my assets folder, I have a different Pokemon for each thing. Okay. And I've wired up Pokemon images of view controller, or as an image view inside of the cell, whatever that is over here. What is that? Oh, that's right. For this, don't worry about it. Okay. So that's not rocket surgery. All right. You should be able to make that happen for Tuesday. Then what I also want you to do is start thinking about Project 1. And by thinking about Project 1, what I mean by that is don't launch Xcode for Project 1. I don't want you to do any actual coding work. I want you to step away. You know, we like to say that AIMS is an intersection of design, technology, and business. We're going to put the technology side over here, and we're just going to think about business strategy and design for Project 1 right now. And that is, I want you to build a productivity app. That is blue sky when it comes to what do I mean by productivity app, okay? And so if you've taken 254 or 222, you know that step 0 for developing a new concept is go to where a problem exists and see what and really understand that problem. And so what I want you to do is think about your peers and yourself and maybe your parents or whatever, but people that you have regular access to, and what kind of problems are they running into from a productivity standpoint. Ideally, these need to be like micro-sized problems because you're not going to be building Spotify, right? Like you're going to be building something that's very targeted because you get to define the scope of this thing. So don't define a scope that's insane, okay? And I'll give you feedback on Tuesday to say that's insane, okay? Like you're like I want to, like last semester or last year somebody built. I mentioned this before, but somebody built like a budgeting tool, okay? You can make a budgeting tool very simple, which is I want to spend X number of dollars this month. That's it, and every transaction just subtracts from that total, okay? Or you can make it slightly more complicated where there's categories, and you say ahead of time, I want to spend this much money in that category, and then it slowly subtracts. Or you can make it the next step where it's like, okay, I want it to automatically sync with my bank account, and every time, or my credit card company, and every time I go to Walmart, that magically goes into the grocery. You can see where this gets insane, right? Scale, keep it small. That's going to be a difficult thing for those of us that are creative to like keep it small. But keep it small because otherwise you're going to be going crazy. It could be another. A couple of years ago, someone built an app that there's currently an app now that has recently launched. It's like a thing where you can keep track of movies that you've seen, and you have your own personal little rating system and that kind of stuff. I forget what it's called. I remember reading it about and be like, it's Sean King's app. But this was like a little tool that you could say, okay, these are all the movies that I've seen, and then it looks up, which we'll talk about how to do this, but it looks up, I think it was using the IMDb API. It looks up, if you type in Shrek, then it'll automatically pull down the image of Shrek in a little description. And then you can say, I give it 4 stars out of 5. And then it would keep track of these are your favorite movies and that kind of thing. Okay? That's the kind of scope that we're talking about. Does that make sense? We're going to be working on this for a couple more weeks, so this will be due just after spring break. So we have lots of time to get there. But right now, just think concept. Okay? So for Tuesday, identify a problem to solve, go to where that problem is and observe and really wrap your head around that problem. And then I want to see some wireframes for Tuesday. So some initial designs of what you think this thing should look like. You can use whatever wireframing tool you want to. I don't care if that is paper, that is Illustrator, Photoshop, XD. If you really don't have any, if you don't want to use any of those things, you could in theory even wireframe in the storyboard just by using segues between things, okay? If you wanted to work inside of Xcode. I think that's probably a bad idea because it's going to constrain you to just the buttons of widgets that you have inside the library. But because we haven't talked about customizing those things to be whatever color you want or anything like that. But if you wanted to, you could do that. Okay? And then for Tuesday, just get that out as either a PNG or a PDF, and you'll be submitting that to Canvas, and we'll talk about them in class. Okay? Any questions about that? Sweet. Just like last time, trying to end early so that if you have problems, I'm available. If you wanted to, you could knock out your little pop culture pokedex application really quick before we're done. But we're done. All right, so I'm going to upload the video to YouTube. I'm going to upload these sample files to Canvas, and I'll get the assignments all set up properly in Canvas, and then I'll be around. Okay? Sound good? All right, if you're done, you're done. Otherwise, stick around.